Today, we'll be taking a look at the latest polls that have been released for the 2022 Senate races, and with November inching closer and closer, we're getting a better and better picture at just exactly which candidates will be on the ballot. And looking at many of these states in which we have polls out of, many of these are some of the most important races that we have this November. Races like the ones in New Hampshire, Nevada, North Carolina, and Georgia. These really are the ones that will decide the makeup of the U.S. Senate after these midterms. And so looking at the 2020 Senate results, you'll see the Democrats held 50 seats. They currently do hold 50 seats, and the GOP are at 50 as well. Now, this is good for the Democrats, of course. They were able to win back the Senate. However, they did underperform expectations. But, on the bright side, this was the first time the Democratic Party had won control of the Senate since the 2012 Senate elections and the re-election of Barack Obama. I mean, this was 2012, a very different time when Claire McCaskill won Missouri by a solid margin, and Heidi Heitkamp won the race in North Dakota. And in 2018, of course, both of these senators were voted out by pretty considerable margins. But in 2020, Democrats were able to take back control. However, with 50 seats, they have absolutely no cushion. They cannot lose a single seat. If they lose a single net seat, they lose the Senate, and that is over. Whatever they want to get passed through the Senate is probably not going to get passed anymore without a lot of compromises. So looking at the current 2022 Senate map, you'll see the Democrats currently hold 4 of the very contentious toss-up races. These are the ones with Democratic incumbents all running for re-election. We have Raphael Warnock in Georgia, Maggie Hassan in New Hampshire, Mark Kelly in Arizona, and Catherine Cortez Masto in Nevada, while the Republicans currently have Ron Johnson in Wisconsin, who is running for re-election, and the retiring Pat Toomey in Pennsylvania, as well as Richard Burr, who is also retiring in North Carolina. So if Democrats want to lose any of these 4 races, they're going to have to gain one of these 3. These other red races, it is very unlikely the Democrats will be able to pick up any sort of victory in those states. So really, I think the best bet for the Democrats currently is to hold on to all 4 of these races while trying to go for Pennsylvania. I think this is one Democrats have the biggest chance in. So today we'll be taking a look at the latest polls, with many of these polls coming out of these 7 very important races. And before we get started, make sure to join my Discord server if you have not, the link to which is at the very top of the description below. So looking at the latest Senate polls, we currently have the latest poll to come out, and these are the 4 new polls out of the state of New Hampshire, currently where Maggie Hassan is running for her re-election. So Maggie Hassan is the Democratic incumbent first elected in 2016, defeating Republican incumbent Kelly Ayotte. So this was the closest race in 2016. Maggie Hassan defeated Kelly Ayotte by just a little bit over 1,000 votes, with over 700,000 votes being cast. In 2022, Hassan will be running for re-election. However, on the Republican side, we do have a very contentious primary currently with Donald Boldeau and Chuck Morse, who is the current president of the New Hampshire Senate, as the 2 main candidates. Now, looking at the betting odds, because we have no polls for the GOP primary in New Hampshire, looking at the betting odds, currently Chuck Morse is the most favored candidate with 43%. Yes, he has a 43% chance at winning the nomination. And so looking at the polls between Hassan and Morse, you'll see the 2 latest ones show Hassan up 6 and up 3, while against Donald Boldeau, Hassan is up 15 and up 6. So this definitely does show that Chuck Morse is the better candidate, but I think the bigger picture here is that Maggie Hassan is very likely to win her re-election. I do think that Maggie Hassan is going to end up victorious in her race. I think it will be very difficult for her to lose. Although New Hampshire is one of these toss-up races, currently the Democratic Party has a significant advantage in this race, and I really don't see them losing it anytime soon. The state of New Hampshire does favor the Democratic Party, and as you saw in 2020, Corky Messner was defeated by Jean Shaheen running for her re-election by over 15 points. So New Hampshire may be competitive sometimes, and it was in 2016 when Maggie Hassan defeated a Republican incumbent, but with Maggie Hassan now having the incumbency, I do think that she will end up victorious in her race. So Currently, I have the state of New Hampshire. I'm going to classify that as likely or lean currently for the Democrats. These are just the classifications I'm getting from these polls. This is not really my prediction. I just want to analyze these latest polls and tell you guys what they really mean about these races. So, looking at the latest polls we've seen out of the state of Nevada with Catherine Cortez Masto, this time another Democratic incumbent running for her re-election. I think that out of all four of these Democratic incumbents in these toss-up races, I do think that Cortez Masto is going to have the hardest time winning hers. And looking at the polls released out of Nevada, you will see why. She is currently not polling very well. She has not been leading in many of the latest polls that have been released. She has only led in 2 polls ever throughout this entire election cycle. So looking at the 2016 election, this was the first election for Catherine Cortez Masto, and she was able to defeat Joe Heck. This was following the retirement of Harry Reid, who was previously the Senate Majority Leader when the Democrats controlled the Senate. So Catherine Cortez Masto, of course, underperformed what we saw from Harry Reid, but she did still end up winning only one county, Clark County, but that was enough to give her the victory. In 2022, I think it is going to be much more difficult for now the Democratic incumbent. On the Democratic side, she is not really expected to receive any sort of primary effort, any sort of strong primary effort, although some have registered or declared. It is very unlikely that she is going to lose this primary. Basically, there's a 0% chance of that actually happening. On the Republican side, Adam Laxalt is basically the de facto nominee at this point. He comes from a long family of Republicans in the state, and I think that he definitely has a very high chance at winning this race. Just looking at the polls released between them, Adam Laxalt has led in all but 2, although many of the polls in which Laxalt has led in have been ones that have been funded by Republican operatives or even the Laxalt campaign himself. However, the latest 3 polls do show that Cortez Masto is not in a good position right now going into this race. She has not been able to poll over 40% since early January, and I mean, looking at these 2 polls released lately between Laxalt and Cortez Masto, you'll see Laxalt leading by 7, as well as Laxalt leading by 3, and this one poll between Brown and Cortez Masto, Sam Brown is another candidate on this in the race. However, he is probably not going to win the GOP primary. And looking at these polls, you do see there is a choice for none of these candidates, and that is a actual thing on the ballot that people in Nevada can vote for. They can vote for none of these candidates, and that is something that they can do. So this is really only specific to the state of Nevada, but that will definitely affect Cortez Masto as the incumbent. I think it is much more likely for voters to not want to vote for the incumbent than it is for them to not want to vote for the challenger. So looking at these polls, I do think Catherine Cortez Masto currently is in a very bad situation, and right now I think that with just the polls, the Republicans definitely do have a little bit of an advantage in this race, one that Democrats really cannot afford to lose. So going back to our main list here, looking at the latest polls that have been released in the state of North Carolina. North Carolina, again, is one of these very important races, although I think the Republicans have a significant advantage in this one. So in 2016, we saw the election of Richard Burr. He was reelected, and in 2022, he will be retiring. So we will have both a Democratic and Republican primary, with the GOP currently expected to nominate Ted Budd. Pat McCrory is also in this race. Pat McCrory is the former governor of the state who lost to Roy Cooper in 2017. So I think that does make him a lot worse of a candidate. And looking at the polling here, you will see that Ted Budd is currently the favorite. He is currently in the U.S. House and has been endorsed by Donald Trump. So I do think Ted Budd will end up the GOP nominee, and he will probably have a pretty smooth ride to victory against Sherry Beasley, the former Supreme Court Chief Justice of the North Carolina Supreme Court. With Sherry Beasley, I think that she is an okay candidate, nothing too exceptional, but I think that in North Carolina, it's going to be very difficult for her to win. As we saw in 2020, Cal Cunningham did not even defeat Tom Tillis. Cal Cunningham was leading by over 15 points in the polls in the summer and the early fall, and before his whole his scandal in October with his sexting scandal right before November and the election, Cal Cunningham was widely expected to win his race, and even he lost by almost 2% to Tom Tillis. Cal Cunningham was still leading in the polls by over 5%, by election night. So it was a definitely a very big defeat for the Democratic Party in North Carolina. And I think that in 2020, in a year where the national environment favors the GOP even more, it will be very difficult for Sherry Beasley to win. And I mean, just looking at the polls, you do see that Sherry Beasley is currently not in a very good situation here. Looking at all the polls released out of the state of North Carolina, Sherry Beasley has only led in one of them, and that is the latest one against Pat McCrory, the very unpopular former governor. And this is the only one he leads against Ted Budd, who really is her main opponent. She is down by 7 points. In the other poll released between her and Budd, she is down by 2 points, and she has not led in a single poll against Ted Budd so far. And if she wants to win this race, that is going to be a major issue for her. Looking at the polls between Sherry Beasley and Ted Budd, you will see that Sherry Beasley has not led in a single poll that has been released. And in this latest one, Ted Budd has even reached 50%, which is obviously enough for him to win the race. So I do think that right now the Republicans have a significant advantage in North Carolina, although, things can change in the coming months, and no matter what, North Carolina will still be one of the most contentious races that we have this fall. And so going back to the list there, we have this one new poll out of the state of Georgia, as well as these other new polls out of the state of North Carolina, which we've looked at just previously. So looking at the latest poll that's been released out of Georgia, this has been one of the most widely polled states. Raphael Warnock is down by 4 points now against Herschel Walker. Looking at the entire spread here, you will see that Raphael Warnock has not really led in a poll in quite a while. The last time that he led against Herschel Walker was all the way back in November of last year. Since then, Herschel Walker has led in every single poll that has been released between Warnock and Walker. This one against Gary Black is not against Herschel Walker, obviously, so that does not really matter. So Raphael Warnock, at one point, it looked like he was going to have a pretty smooth ride to re-election, with him leading in basically all the polls that we had seen. However, now, with Herschel Walker leading almost all of them and getting very close to 50%, almost 49% in many of these races, he may even avoid a runoff. And of course, in the state of Georgia, we do have the runoff system. As you can see, Raphael Warnock was elected in the runoff race, with him only winning 33% in the first round. So candidates here must win over 50%, or the top two will advance to a runoff. Now, in the 2022 Senate election in Georgia, the Republicans are currently going to nominate Herschel Walker. That is pretty obvious at this point. Gary Black has no chance. Herschel Walker has the backing of Donald Trump and is fairly popular within the GOP in his state. And so, looking at the polls between Walker and Warnock, Herschel Walker has led, and again, the last 7 polls released between the two. I think that it will be very difficult for Raphael Warnock to win back this race, but I do think that Warnock will run the better campaign. He is the more experienced politician. I think Herschel Walker will make blunders. There have already been, issues within his campaign and his personal life that have affected him in his campaign so far, but I do think that right now the Democratic Party is, again, not in a very good situation in this race as well. I think that really the only one that we've seen today with the Democrats actually being favored is the race in New Hampshire. So this really does spell out the general picture that the Republican Party currently is performing a lot better. And Democrats do typically overperform in the polls. As we saw in 2020, Democrats had a pretty disappointing race, and that was because Democrats were leading in many of these very competitive races. They were leading by much larger margins in Michigan, where Gary Peters only won by 1.7%. In Georgia, Jon Ossoff was expected to win on the first round, just according to the polls. In North Carolina, Tom Tillis was losing by almost 5 to 7 points before the election in November, and just looking at many of these races, Iowa was expected to actually go to Teresa Greenfield on, if you just looked at the polling. So with Democrats leading by pretty significant margins in the polls and then losing by, also pretty significant margins in the very end, with Democrats not even leading in the polls that we were seeing for 2022 so far, I think that they're going to have a very difficult road to keeping the Senate this year. So Looking at some of the other new polls that we've seen out of the Senate, like the ones in Louisiana with John Kennedy winning by 39 points. Of course, this one is not, anything too significant to talk about. Louisiana is going to go to the GOP with John Kennedy winning his re-election. But we do have this interesting one here in the state of Utah where Mike Lee is only at 24% against Evan McMullin. Evan McMullin is, of course, an independent. So, Mike Lee is only at 43%, not even at a majority in his own state. I don't think that anything is really going to come out of this too much. Evan McMullin, of course, came in 5th place as an independent in the 2016 election, one of the better performances for a true independent. But, Evan McMullin did do the best in Utah, which makes sense. He is now going to be running for the Senate in Utah. I think that his campaign can, make up a lot of this margin in the coming months, with Mike Lee really not currently being the biggest supporter of Donald Trump. But I do think that Mike Lee is still relatively safe. This new poll out of the state of Alaska showing Kelly Chewbacca leading by 2 points over Lisa Murkowski. This is, of course, funded by the Chewbacca campaign. So this will obviously skew the race in favor of Chewbacca, but looking at the general trend here, Lisa Murkowski has basically led in all the polls that have been released. There was this one that was funded by, Democratic operatives showing Al Gross actually defeating Lisa Murkowski on the first round. This, of course, was because it was funded by Democrats. So in the end, Kelly Chewbacca did win this poll against Al Gross, but I don't think that he really will be able to make it to that second round in runoff voting or that final round. Because Alaska will, of course, be using ranked choice voting, which will benefit Lisa Murkowski, as she'll probably get second place votes from either Chewbacca or Gross, whichever one that does not come out in the top 2. And so, the polls in Alaska I don't think really matter too much. It's going to be a Republican no matter what. Lisa Murkowski does vote with the Republican Party a very vast majority of the time. There are just some issues in which she has not, and, Trump is really the only big one, and as well as many of the Supreme Court nominees. And looking at, the latest polls released out of Missouri, you'll see the Republicans have a very significant advantage. Lucas Counts is expected to be the nominee. Scott Sifton has dropped out. And I mean, even against Eric Greitens, the very unpopular former governor of the state, Lucas Counts is still down by 1 point. Against Schmidt, he is down 15. And Hartzler, he is down by 18 points. So, again, I think the Republican Party going into the 2022 midterms is in a good position. However, that is, in no way a guarantee that they're going to win. The Democrats can still, in these coming months, improve their popularity and, maybe hold on to control of the Senate. I don't think it's going to be a blowout win for either party. That's just very unlikely to happen, in this political climate. But I do think that we're going to see some very interesting races this fall. So this is not my prediction. This is only just, looking at the polls and what they tell us. And right now, I think that they too do tell us that the Democratic Party is, I'm going to have to work very hard to try to gain back support of their voters, and enthusiasm is another thing. They do need their voters to turn out, and typically Democrats don't turn out in the midterms as much as Republicans do, and, with the general environment favoring the GOP, I think that is going to become an even larger issue. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to join my Discord server if you have not, link at the very top of the description below. Like this video if you enjoyed it, comment down below which races you're watching for, which ones you think are the most important. Subscribe to my channel if you have not, and I'll see you guys in the next video.